Hello, friends. Good to see you all. My Patreon supporters, thank you very much, as always, for continuing to contribute to this effort. Got some exciting stuff for you today, and that is, as of last night, I finished the first copy draft of Cold Plague, the scenario I've been working on, the Call of Cthulhu scenario I've been working on. Boy, that sounds wrong, isn't it? Fast talking none. Then you're going to have to roll your fast talk, and I'm going to have to come up with some stats for the nuns, some very basic stats. And, just for example, here's Maxwell Degree. This is a player character that appears in this game, and I'm going to have to clean all this up, do another character sheet. That's actually going to be my chore over the next couple days. The characters actually have a good amount of info. I think I have, yeah, okay. So I have some info there, some character info there. Now, this game is as much about it's as much about role playing these characters in this environment as it is about solving the scenario. The scenario is very straightforward, and I say that right up front. This is not a very complex. It's not Shadows of Yog-Sothoth or Masks Nigral-Hotep, or even some of the stuff from The Asylum or Curse of the Chthonians, which were all short stories, basically short scenarios for Call of Cthulhu, or something like the absolutely magnificent Castle of Greed and Good Vibes Only by Phaedra of Stars Are Right. And unfortunately, they've announced they're not going to be continuing Stars Are Right. They've moved on to other things in life, which is awesome. But they produced some great scenarios that were really unique, and they were very short. They were very concise, but they were not linear. This is very linear, and I think it's a solid scenario. And I spend a lot of time. Some other things I need to fix there. There's some other things that I need to touch up here, and I need to clean up, and I need to clarify. But for the most part, it's done. And the good news is most of the Patreon subscribers of $10 or more will be getting the system reference document of this soon, probably by early next week. So you'll have basically the whole scenario. Then you're going to, of course, get discounted download codes for everybody to go download the actual one with all the plague that people who have come and played the game with me in person have seen. The Hold of the Castagnata, which by the way, these are all kind of spoilery. I should have said that. These are spoilery. Let's look at something non-spoilery. Let's look at the Cold Camp in Truro, where it's pretty obvious that's where you're gonna start out. There's no secret that the Cold Camp's there. So you start out at this camp in Truro, this sick camp, and this is where the game more or less begins. The action more or less begins. And example of the map, a couple of the other maps. I don't want to show you too much. Here's the Truro farmhouse. And again, that's not really a spoiler. Within the first 15 minutes of the game, you're going to be spending the night in an old farmhouse. So that's not a secret. Anybody who's played it already knows that. I really have to work on the scaling, I think, of some of the assets. No, maybe not. I mean, this is meant to be representational. So the good thing about Call of Cthulhu is it's not positional and strategic. And in fact, I'll probably even turn the grid off for the actual game. It's not Pathfinder or 5th Ed where every positioning in a 5-foot area matters, and again, so I got to meet up with a friend of mine, longtime friend from the Renaissance Fair scene and gaming and music, Will Smith, yesterday, and we talked about this. Like, you play Pathfinder and you play even 5th Ed D&D. It's so much about the tactical space and tactical options. And while I appreciate that, and it's cool, like 5th Ed D&D is pretty much, after a certain point, he described it very well, Marvel Avengers fantasy world. It kind of is. Like, your powers are so outrageous. My dwarf is basically elements of the Hulk, and, I would say, maybe Captain America with some of the tricks he can do with his combat stuff or whatever. It's the character now at 14th level is effectively powerful enough that it's you feel like you're playing a superhero, and that's fine because that's what it's meant to be. But it's kind of nice also having a game like this where all of that doesn't factor as much into it, and it's more about role playing and the plot resolution through the interaction and role playing and clue finding. So again, the grids, the grids, I can easily turn the grid off here. I just go here and I say show grid. This is all done in Incarnate, by the way. The software is an online. It's a web interface called Incarnate. You can export the maps for VDT. It is a fee, but it's so nominal. I think I paid $25 a year or whatever. I forget what I'm paying, but it's so little, and you get all these free assets. And you can upload your own assets, and there are hundreds of free packs of thousands of assets out there, and you can buy assets that are a little bit more sophisticated and upload them. It's so worth it. And I was able to make this map of the farmhouse, mostly just to give a visual feel. Like, I could run this entire game in mind's eye theater, but I like having maps, especially at a tabletop, because it focuses attention. In my opinion, like, it helps focus attention, and I'll save it, sure. And it helps give the players an idea of the mood you want to evoke. Like, that's part of what maps do to me. Like, let's look at famous maps of fantasy worlds. Like, of course, Tolkien's iconic, Lord of the Rings maps, and the maps for Game of Thrones, and of Westeros and all that. And let's even look at the original maps of Greyhawk. Like, that was your visual impression of this world initially. So, maps, there will be five maps I counted that you will get with this scenario, and they're pretty much done. The characters, as I said, let me go back to the character sheets that you will get. Here's Anne McGraw. She the other doctor? Is Anne the other doctor? Evening, whenever you watch this video. So I started out with the timeline of events for this scenario. I didn't do all of Provincetown. I didn't do a whole Provincetown timeline, just regarding this scenario. Then I did the population, population industry, flora, fauna, technology, infrastructure, Cape Cod 1922. New perils. There are 2 unique systems in this game to handle disease and infection, and weather trauma, being out in the freezing cold, because that is part of this game. There are points where the characters are stuck out, or they should be stuck out in the cold, and no matter how well you prepare, there's always a threat. I resisted the temptation to bring in the Windwalker or anything like that. I wanted to make this really just about the investigators facing the elements to get this story completed. And in various playtests, it has been varying, and probably playtests has been varying in terms of how much of an impact that it takes, that has. Then the actual scenario background, where I talk about kind of the occult mythos details. And then playing Coldplay. Here's the different scenes. The characters move through the different scenes. You start off with a prelude. You end up at the sick camp. You go through these various portions. Again, I won't talk too much about those. I don't want to spoil it. And then there's the epilogue. And then I talk about extended possibilities. And the extended possibilities are what I suggest if you want to make it a longer scenario. Again, it's supposed to be between 3 and 4 hours. That's usually about what it runs to complete. This is if you want to make it a 2-night game. 8 hours or 6 hours or even 12 hours. You could throw in all of my extended possibilities here, and it could be 14 hours of play. That's fine. I wrote this, again, to be a very encapsulated adventure to run at conventions and to run online in like 3 to 4 hours. That was my whole goal. Then I have my appendix. I have Namtar, which if you're part of Namtar Ygztul, if you're part of the Patreon, you've already seen aspects of that character, that great old one appear. A little bit about the ghouls of Cape Cod, some stats on them, some references. Then the Incantation Bowl, NPCs. Then we have our player characters, sources and references, and visual aids. So for those of you who are interested in knowing, now it took me 30 minutes to get to this, or 26 minutes to get to this point. For those of you who are interested in how I actually lay out these scenarios, this is it. And that's like the single biggest question I've had, even when I did my talk at Necronomicon, one of the biggest questions I had was, well, how do you incorporate all this stuff into this scenario? Then you run it, and then you throw these ideas at players. I mean, obviously, the first thing is 35 years plus of practice. That's the reality. The second is I start with an outline, and I kind of do an if then, like I do a mental if then, and I start breaking it down. Like the first scene is the sick camp, so that's the first thing. That's this Camp Churro. That's kind of the first point at which I really start elaborating, and I kind of break it down into, okay, at the sick camp, there is the introduction. There are the introductions of NPCs under greetings. There is a discussion on the basics of what people see at the camp. And then there is a little bit about people suffering from the plague and what characters can learn and things that they need to find out and figure out and how they can go about that and who they can talk to. And I also throw a little background here in about the people who are sick and who are dying. Then I have rumors and information because, of course, not everything the players hear is true, right? And that's part of the fun part of any of these games, I think, is what's true and what's not. And then I have the next act is the farmhouse. And again, this is all very linear. This scenario is unlike a lot of what I run in that it's a very beginning to end sequence, and it's meant to be that way. And then I have the farmhouse, and I have the events at the farmhouse, arrival at the farmhouse, some background about the farmhouse and some of the NPCs that are going to be there. Now, I've also started to break down. This is like how people at the farmhouse interact with the NPCs. And then I have other areas of the farmhouse, and I have the basement, of course, which is serving as an impromptu morgue. And, nothing weird or creepy. Typo. Nothing ever weird or creepy happens in morgues at old farmhouses over the winter during a plague. So there's the farmhouse. Then I have some investigative resources around the house because it was a working farmhouse run by held by a fairly affluent family. And here's where characters can actually start to learn things, and they can go through some of the books and some of the periodicals that are there and go through them, and they can find out some pretty interesting things and a little bit about the lore of the area. They can find a little bit about the lore of the area, so they can start to piece together things about the plague and about the area that will become relevant, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then there's the dinner conversation. I wrote up the dinner conversation. I didn't write up the work conversations line for line. I give an overview, like what's going to be discussed, what the mood is, who are the NPCs who are going to be there, how are they going to react to being questioned, or weird things that are going on. Like have a great Thanksgiving weekend. I hope it's fun, productive, relaxing, whatever you choose to make it. Thanks a lot.